Hello, good evening, and welcome to a new episode of Arguably the Reading Quest. I am Nishant. So, before we start, just a small appeal, please subscribe the channel and please press the bell icon. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about rather an unusual topic, not as a complaint but as a concern, which I assume will, strike a chord amongst all of you guys. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the so-called great books that have been very disappointing to me. Books that are, talked about in the social media circles, books that are talked about in the, literary circles, and, the books that we have often been hearing. Some books have also been awarded Nobel Prize in Literature as well. But I assume, these books have been, very disappointing to me. So I'd like to, speak on these books that didn't appeal to me much. I don't know why. Maybe perhaps because I couldn't relate to it. Maybe because, there's something misplaced either in the book or in my understanding of the book. But this video is not intended to be a complaint, rather just a discussion on what are the books that have failed to disappoint, that have failed to appeal me, and that's a very subjective, thing of a sort. So the very first name, I will start from the very latest book, a writer which has been awarded a Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 2023, and has been much talked about. I am talking of Jan Fosse, published at Fitzgerald edition. Jan Fosse Septology, and that is known as his magnum opus. I started reading this book, but trust me, I left this book midway. Even after much trying, I had to leave it midway. Now you see, the description is so beautiful. This follows the lives of two men living close to each other on the west coast of Norway. The year is coming to close, and Azel, an aging painter and a widower, is retrospecting about his life. He lives alone, his only friend being his neighbor Aslik, a bachelor and a traditional Norwegian fisherman farmer. Now, as the description says, written in hypnotic prose that shifts between the first and the third person, the other name calls into question concrete notions about subjectivity and self, what makes us who we are. And why do we need not another life, but the one life that we are, living and leading. Now, the description appears very beautiful. And it is because of this description and with a label that this book has been awarded a Nobel Prize in Literature, I picked up this book. But somehow, this has been such a big disappointment, let me tell you, if you simply copy Samuel Beckett, you won't become Beckett. This whole book is written in one single sentence that runs up to 300 lines, 300 pages, without even a single full stop. But that is not my problem. My problem is that if you have all the ingredients of, existentialism, all the ingredients of loneliness, all the ingredients of, let's say human suffering, even then you won't be able to write a good book. The problem is not the story, but the treatment with the story. The author tries to bring up many images of loneliness and existentialism and crisis from everyday life, but to no avail. It simply didn't appeal. It reads like an ordinary narrative without full stop. I don't know. But also this is not a problem for me because I've read Beckett, so I know, there are sentences like, 50 lines running without a full stop. That is not the problem. I feel, the narrative has lost any kind of existential, mystery, or it has failed to shed any light on the hitherto unknown aspects of human existence. That is the issue. It is tedious, I'll say it is ponderous, overtly repetitive, and trust me, incredibly frustrating. You have to read it to believe it, why I am, using such intensifying adjectives. And one thing that is very irritating about this book is that it is full of, instead of full stop, there is a clause, I think, I think, I think. The whole book is full of this clause, I think. So in place of full stop, I think is used. And I don't know what effect it brings. Slow prose. Now, this was one reason for me to pick up this book. I don't know what does slow prose means. It is neither hypnotic nor slow prose. It is simply dragging to some kind of, dull end, endlessly without saying anything at all. And I think there's some kind of arrogance with the writer who thinks that he can, appropriate human misery with some kind of syntactical, grammatical gimmickry. So I believe there is something, seriously wrong with this book. And Nobel Prize in Literature, definitely not. If you want to read something called slow and hypnotic prose, my suggestion is please read Middlemarch, please read Peter Kamazin, please read The Book of Disquiet, please read Fallen Leaves. But this book has been a disappointment, and I am rather sad about, this book, because I picked up with a lot of hopes, Nobel Prize coming from a Norwegian writer, So I expected a lot of, existential stuffs in it. But somehow this book, failed to live up to its expectation. Jon Fosse. Definitely not recommended. Another book, and it would rather very controversial to say that it has disappointed me, because this is one book that is written by a female writer, is an American-African writer who has been awarded a Nobel Prize in Literature. And this book is much talked about. And people are crazy about this book. I tried reading it, but again, I am rather sad that this book has disappointed me. And so much so that I bought a Everyman Classics hardcover to keep it in my permanent library. I tried reading it. I finished the book as well. This time I finished it. I didn't leave it midway. But somehow, this book didn't hit me hard. And this is Toni Morrison's Beloved. Sorry to say if it, surprises you. This is Toni Morrison's Beloved. And this has been a big disappointment for me. There's a difference between, obscurity and depth. There's a difference between honest look at human nature and undisciplined pandering of, human emotions. And there is just so much stuff in this book, Beloved. I mean, you have themes, you have motives, you have tonal and style shift. A lot of surrealism, magic realism is there. Streams of consciousness is there. Metaphors, hard-hitting images of rape and slavery is there. With all these images, with all these, wonderful ingredient, you cannot write a great book, because a great book is something more than all these ingredients put together. And no one can deny that. The theme is amazing. It's, the plight of recently freed slaves in the year after Civil War and what they endured both during slavery and after it. And that is what the book questions. But my problem is not the theme, rather how the story is written. Let me tell you the summary of the novel, how breathtakingly beautiful it reads, but it fails to drive home the point. The novel is based on a true story of a black slave woman, Margaret, who in 1856 escaped from, Kentucky plantation with her family. They sought refuge in Ohio State, but their owner and law officers soon caught up with the family. Before their recapture, Margaret killed her young daughter to prevent her return to slavery. Now, Seeth is the main character who is based on Margaret. She killed one of her daughters to protect her from the horrors she was exposed to during her time as a slave, and that was written on the tombstone as Beloved. She killed the daughter, she buried her, and the name was Beloved. Now, many years later, Seeth is free and living with her other teenage daughter, and a girl named Beloved enters their life and everything changes. So mix of surrealism, mix of horror story, magic realism, everything is there. But I'm sorry, it didn't hit me hard. You have to read it to believe it. If you have read it, please do, let me know how did you like the book. I still give it a benefit of doubt. There is some, misplaced understanding of literature, the way I see it. And that is why, the book has failed to, create any impression on my mind. So this was, I assume, a very sad reading story of my life. I didn't like Toni Morrison's Beloved. And that's a big claim to make, but I stand by my claim. Another book by one of my favorite writers, please mind it, I have mentioned him in, some of the greatest philosophical novels written in the 20th century. But if you are an American and you write about Indian spiritual journey, about an American guy who is in search of the absolute, it didn't always mean that it will be a great book. It can be a sheer disappointment as well. And just because an American is writing about, an American guy in search of the absolute who came to India and who, wants some kind of spiritual enlightenment, who is in search of some kind of spiritual awakening, that doesn't automatically make the book a great book. But there's some kind of, I assume there's some kind of inferiority complex with us Indians that, whatever is coming from the West in the name of Indian spirituality or a Westerner's search of a spirituality, we take it in a very, with a very high degree of respect and with very high expectations, with very great expectations. So the book I'm talking about is Somerset Maugham's The Razor Edge. Please mind it, he is one of my favorite writers when it comes to the painted wheel, when it comes to of human bondage. But this book has disappointed me because, again, I have, read it by on the strength of the recommendation of some of my friends and my seniors who held the book in high regard, but to no avail. This book is about Larry Darrell, a young American in search of the absolute. The progress of this spiritual odyssey involves him with some of Maugham's character, his fiancée Isabel and her uncle Elliot, an American snob. It seemed to me that the book has failed on two counts. First of all, providing a compelling character portrait, and second, to give an account of man's spiritual progress. The Razor's Edge is a phrase used by Osho as well, the controversial and the very revered, iconic spiritual master from India, Osho. He has often used this phrase, the Razor's Edge. And trust me, all that bullshit stereotyping of Eastern philosophy as boiling down to Advait. No, there is much more to Eastern philosophy than Advait philosophy. And Advait is not the only philosophy. And if any, Westerner writes about Advait, and non-dualism, it is so frustrating. It seems so contrived. Trust me, if you're not Hermann Hesse, if you're not Aldous Huxley, if you're not Will Durant, you shouldn't be attempting writing, a Western account of Indian spirituality. I think Mom somehow, got confused for a moment and he thought that he was Hermann Hesse. He was not. And we didn't want him to be a Hermann Hesse. But somehow he got confused. He has hardly any understanding of Indian spirituality. And he failed miserably. And trust me, I mean, it is very painful to see Somerset Maugham, failing so miserably after having, written books like Of Human Bondage, where he was at its existential and, atheistic best. So The Razor's Edge, definitely a disappointing read for me. Another book that, disappointed me is, V.S. Naipaul, India, A Wounded Civilization. I don't know why this name, India, a wounded civilization, is taken, because there is hardly any talk about India from a civilizational perspective. It is all about bureaucratic mismanagement and bureaucracy wedded with totalitarianism. And it's a kind of rant against India being a functional anarchy driven by some kind of a pathetic bureaucracy. I don't know why this title, Wounded Civilization. There is hardly any talk of civilization. Now, to dissect it, Naipaul was born as a Hindu and a Brahmin, and his forefathers moved to Trinidad as an indentured labor in sugarcane plantation of that country. The book is simplistic, shallow, and misplaced. And these are some of the media-created writers. Not even the prose is interesting, trust me. You will find better prose in today's Hindu and Indian Express. The prose is absolutely banal and dull, prosaic. Written during his second visit to India during the emergency, Naipaul primarily tries to understand India in this book through some of the works of Gandhi, R.K. Narayanan, U.R. Ananthamurthy, Sudhir Kakkad, and Vijay Tendulkar. Some of what he says makes sense, but the disgust toward the country remained all too evident throughout. For a country like India, I mean, you see the complexity of, the Indian community, right from Kashmir to Kanyakumari and right from, Gujarat to Nagaland. You cannot, generalize India with your one small visit, and that too with a kind of foreigner's mindset. So this is again a Westerner's rant about India. My problem is not that. My problem is that you should have at least written, some beautiful prose here, being a Nobel Prize in literature. But the book has failed miserably, and definitely not a wounded civilization. There is hardly any talk about civilization here. It's just about the functional anarchy that India is, but the book could have been better. I mean, anyone who has visited India and who has understood India could have written a better book than V.S. Naipaul. This book is so frustrating. Now, the last book of this series, and that has been much talked about in, amongst the college students, amongst the people who, are a big fan of a genre called Bildungsroman. But this book has failed miserably. And the book is The Catcher in the Rye. It is so popular, guys. Trust me, I hope all of you know that it has become a cult classic in itself. J.D. Salinger. I read it some 10 years, before. 10 years ago. And I had very high hopes with this book. Also, I picked it up because I was, very much into reading Bildungsroman. And with all the 4 books that I have discussed previously, I can still entertain a benefit of doubt that, I have not understood these 4 books, but not about this book. Because this book comes from the genre which I have been reading a lot, and I have read a lot in my lifetime. And that is Bildungsroman. And this book has failed miserably. Now, the main character is Holden. Now, all the Holden's indictment of society boils down to the insight that everybody is a phony, everybody is fake, everybody is spurious. That's fine. I mean, there's no issue with that. But that's the kind of insight a 16-year-old considers deep. Now, a 40-year-old person like me recognizes Holden insight as superficial and banal, indulging in some kind of, the cheapest kind of adolescent posturing. And trust me, I mean, the amount of times he say Goddam and phony was highly irritating in the book. This book, of course, contains some good quotes, but a good quote here and there hardly makes a great book. I mean, and Holden and his adolescent peers typically behave as though the fate they have suffered, the fate that is disillusionment and the end of innocence, is unique in human history. No, that is not unique in human history. He can't see beyond the spectacle of his own disillusionment And I believe neither can J.D. Salinger. For all his painful self-consciousness, Holden Caulfield is not really self-aware. He can't see that he himself is a phony. And he is trying to be a kind of escapist throughout the novel. He is escapist. He simply ponders and rants without, having a concrete thought about the philosophy of life that he wants to explore. And the way he, whinged about everything gets tiresome. Whinging and persistent complaining. He whined about to get up, he complains persistently having to walk anywhere about every person he comes in contact, so that I lost track of any potential plot buried deep in the book. This is hardly a Bildungsroman. I don't know why this book is considered a cult classic. But this book is considered a cult classic. But if you compare it with some of the greatest Bildungsroman written, this book falls short of its Bildungsromanship. Let's start with the Bildungsroman like Great Expectations of Dickens or David Copperfield. Let's talk about Hermann Hesse Siddhartha. Peter Kamazint. Let's talk about Knut Hamsun's Hunger. Let's talk about The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, James Joyce. Let's talk about The Guide. Let's talk about Damien, Hermann Hesse. Let's talk about Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. Let's talk about Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. From a plethora of writers across ages, across geography, writing on one thing that is called Bildungsroman, wherein a story of a boy is portrayed right from the very childhood to adolescent to adulthood, where he suffers some kind of spiritual crisis and he, awakens up to some kind of epiphany in life. This book failed miserably. So guys, these are the 5, books that I talked about that have disappointed me. Please do let me know your opinion on the same. And, please like, share and subscribe my YouTube channel, arguably The Reading Quest, if you haven't done that. You can also follow me at Instagram. Happy reading, guys.